All right. Uh, Welcome to week 7, maybe, of our class. We've got two short readings today, and we're going to be talking about homeless folks today. Um, the first one, this article here on the right, is what to say and what not to say when you meet a homeless person. So, this is a homeless person here with a sign, and there are 5 things to say and 5 things not to say. So, what to say? I don't have money, but is there another way I can help you? That's a pretty good one because what you'll find for a lot of people is that there's a lot of other things they need. So this guy, for example, needed clothes, um, and actually you see that at Our Lady of the Road all the time. People really need coats, they need socks, gloves, underwear, things like that, hats. Second thing is talk about sports. Uh, Sports is kind of like a universal thing. You can always talk to people about sports, and even if you don't know much about it, just ask them who their favorite team is, joke around a little bit. There's a lot that you can do there. At Our Lady of the Road, I talk to a guy about Notre Dame football all the time, so there's something there. It's kind of like a social lubricant. You can kind of just talk to people about that all the time. Good morning, hi, hello, just acknowledging somebody is a good way to go. Um, how are you doing? Would you like to talk? This one is good because it's open-ended. So generally, open-ended questions are great because they allow the other person to kind of reveal themselves in the way that they would like to. Um, the thing is, if you ask this kind of question, you need to be willing to listen. Uh, so if you're going to ask a question that's open-ended, make sure that you're willing to listen. I will keep you in my thoughts is a good one. I would, praying sometimes too, asking people if they'd be open to prayer is a good one too. Um, I found in my work with people who are homeless that a prayer is very, very, very often appreciated. So that can be something to do too. Okay, things to not say. Why don't you get help? That's kind of obvious as to why you shouldn't say it. The idea there is that the person hasn't already tried to get help, but typically they have tried to get help, or maybe they don't want help. Most people don't prefer being homeless. Um, so here it says, most homeless people are not chronically on the street. Instead, they're living there temporarily because of an awful situation. Now, on the other hand, I mean, there are some people who are homeless because they prefer being homeless to being at a shelter. They prefer being homeless to living in their, whatever situation they might have at home or whatever it might be. And oftentimes that's associated with a mental illness. But even in those cases, why don't you get help is not going to be a great question because it might kind of support some it might distance you from them. They might think that you're trying to help them or force help on them, which is going to make it difficult to actually encounter them. Um, Here's a dollar. Please don't use it to buy alcohol. If you choose to give someone money, it must be without strings. Um, I often give homeless people money because I think that it shows them a sort of trust. Now, is that money often misused? Probably. Um, but part of the question is, are we humanizing the encounter? Are we humanizing them by giving them money? And I guess I tend to lean towards yes on this, but I'll be curious to hear what you guys think. Um, why don't you go to a shelter? This is kind of like the why don't you get help thing. For some people, going to a shelter is not the place they want to be. And also, it's the case that uh, there's not always room in the shelters. Oftentimes, they're full. And shelters often come with a lot of strings attached to them. So you have to be clean, you have to be non-disruptive, you have to be going to certain kinds of programming. So some people prefer to not go to shelters. You don't seem like you should be homeless. Well, most people probably don't want to be homeless, and it implies that they would like to stay homeless. Um, Now, I mean, on the other hand, though, a lot of the folks we see at Our Lady of the Road do have drug addictions and mental illnesses. So I don't know that this would be true of most of the people that we're encountering. Um, it probably be a little more. It probably would be a little more true of the people you encounter, say, at the homeless center, who are on hard times and who are maybe more in a family situation. Um, yeah, get a job. Well, if they could get a job, they would. Um, And in fact, many of the people at Our Lady of the Road have jobs. They work they work odd jobs. I just had a guy tell me last week that he got a part-time job doing bussing tables and doing dishes. So, so that's a good thing. And he's actually a pretty skilled guy. He's a handy worker, handyman. So it's not that it's not only that they don't want a job. It's often there's a lot of other factors there. All right. So the second article that we have for today is focused on early childhood education. So um, we're looking at the effects of homelessness on young children in particular. And this article is a shift in some of the things that we're looking at because now we're looking at uh, homeless families. So this article was written in 2012. So at that time, the typical homeless family was headed by a young single woman in her 20s with limited education, often less than a high school degree, with two children, one or both under the age of 6 years old. They stay in short time. They stay for short times at homeless shelters, and they move around a lot. So they have frequent moves, and this makes for a really turbulent childhood for a lot of the kids. This article is looking at um, ways to make the home life and the educational opportunities available to the kids of homeless families um, possible, to make that possible. So this one is talking about preschool opportunities in particular. And there was this McKinney-Vento Homeless Assistance Act. It's a federal law that addresses the education of children and youth experiencing homelessness in public schools. So it provides federal funding to address problems that this population encounters when enrolling in and attending public schools. So this turbulence is something that they're trying to address by getting the kids in preschool, getting the kids in educational programs. But part of the problem is that children who are homeless are a lot more hungry. They're in poor physical health, emotional health, and they're generally at a disadvantage, kind of just, well, as you can imagine, I mean, if you go to school for 4 or 5 hours a day as a 3 or 4 year old, if you're hungry, if you haven't gotten a good amount of attention at home, if you're not well taken care of there, school's going to be hard for you. Um, and this is something we see especially like in later ages for kids who have no food at home. If you're starving, literally starving, it's going to be very difficult to focus. You're not going to like you're not going to have physically enough energy to do the mental processing that school takes. The other piece to this is that the family life is going to be kind of rough because for many of these people, for many of these children, their mothers have been in domestic abuse situations, um, and they're really at a disadvantage. So that's what a lot of this material focuses on. So it's things like, grade level performance, depression, anxiety, conduct disorder and hostility, um, test scores, and so on. And then it shifts down here to talk about the number of homeless children enrolled in preschool programs. And so the rest of this article is talking about ways to get more kids into these preschool programs to get them some more stable environment. Um, okay. So then they go through and they look at some implications for policy and practice. Um, eh, childcare, childcare and preschool programs should consider prioritizing homeless children during enrollment, similar to the way that Head Start does. So this would be sort of like a preferential option for the poor, maybe. It would be kind of one way of thinking about that. They should reduce barriers to enrolling young homeless children in early learning programs. So one of the things you'll notice with people who are homeless is that it's very difficult to fill out all the paperwork because it often involves a lot of steps. You got to get your paperwork from this office, from that department. You got to mail it. You got to go into the post office. You got to go into the Social Security office. You got to go into various bureaucratic agencies and get this all figured out. All of that work makes it less and less likely that uh, this will actually happen. Improve coordination of programs serving young homeless children. So one of the things too that happens here is there are a lot of different agencies that like to serve, but they're not always coordinated. And that is for various reasons, but in any case, it makes it really hard to get the best out of all of the agencies that are offering these people help. Housing, of course, would be really helpful. Shelter programs that have support, emotional, physical, social, emotional support for young homeless children in particular, because they're dealing with a lot of stuff. So, okay, so those are the two articles for this week. The question we'll be looking at for this week is, I think it's something like, let's see, I think it's something like, what do you think about homeless people, and why do you think what you do about homeless people? So the why, as you guys are starting to pick up on, I'm often curious to know the why in your questions. So what do you think about homeless people, and why do you think what you do? Okay, so I look forward to seeing you guys soon. Keep up the good work. Have a great weekend. And yeah, see you soon.